Okay, so you want to own a bowling alley. It's the most nostalgic business in America. Everyone's been to one. The birthday parties, the rented shoes, the neon carpet that's somehow the same neon carpet in every one of them. And unlike most of the businesses we take apart on this channel, this one isn't obscure. The largest operator in the country did $1.2 billion in revenue last year, which sounds like a healthy business, except for one number buried in their filings. Last year, at the biggest bowling company in America, revenue from bowling went down, and the company grew anyway, not despite that, because of what replaced it. By the end of this video, you'll understand why bowling was once bigger than professional football, and I mean that literally, with the viewership numbers to prove it. You'll understand the single statistic that fell by 89% and took 8,000 businesses down with it. You'll understand what it actually costs to put one lane on the floor, and why the machine at the end of that lane is quietly being replaced across the country right now. And you'll understand the thing that decides whether a bowling alley is worth anything at all, which has nothing to do with bowling, and everything to do with what the building becomes after it dies. Because these buildings don't just close, they get converted, and what they get converted into is the strangest part of this whole story. Let's start at the top, because bowling didn't stumble into decline. It fell from a genuinely enormous height. In 1936, an engineer named Gottfried Schmidt built the first working mechanical pinsetter. Before that machine existed, every bowling alley in America ran on teenagers. They were called pin boys, and they sat in the pit at the end of the lane, in the dark, dodging flying pins, resetting them by hand for a few dollars a week. Dangerous, badly paid work, and the entire economics of bowling depended on it staying cheap. Schmidt's patent was sold to AMF in 1941. The machine debuted in 1946. By 1958, AMF had leased its 40,000th pin spotter. 40,000 machines in 12 years. That's what it looks like when an industry automates overnight. And the buildings followed. American bowling centers went from around 6,600 in 1955 to about 11,000 by 1963, peaking near 12,000 in the mid-60s. Wall Street noticed. Between 1957 and its peak in 1961, Brunswick's stock rose roughly 1,590%. Bowling wasn't a pastime, it was a bubble. And then it crashed, the way bubbles do. But here's the part people forget. Even after the stock collapsed, bowling itself stayed massive as a sport. In 1964, a bowler named Don Carter signed the first $1 million endorsement deal in the history of professional athletics. Not the first in bowling, the first in any sport, period. Before Mickey Mantle, before Arnold Palmer, a bowler. And the Pro Bowlers Tour, which aired on ABC starting in 1962, regularly pulled 12 to 14 million viewers a week, routinely outdrawing college football. That's the height this business fell from. Now here's how it fell. Because the thing that killed the bowling alley wasn't a competitor. It was the quiet disappearance of one specific customer. In the 1978 to 79 season, American bowling's governing bodies counted more than 9.8 million certified league bowlers. People who signed up, paid in advance, and showed up every week for an entire season. By the 2022 to 23 season, that number was 1,093,909, from 9.8 million to just over 1 million, a decline of about 89%. And here's what makes it strange. People didn't stop bowling. In 1995, the political scientist Robert Putnam published an essay documenting exactly this. Between 1980 and 1993, the total number of American bowlers went up 10%, while league bowling fell 40%. More bowlers, far fewer leagues. He called the essay Bowling Alone, and it became one of the most famous pieces of social science of the last 50 years. Most people remember it as a story about loneliness. It's also, very precisely, a story about a business model collapsing. Putnam said so directly. Here's his line, and it explains the entire industry. Quote, "The rise of solo bowling threatens the livelihood of bowling lane proprietors because those who bowl as members of leagues consume 3 times as much beer and pizza as solo bowlers. And the money in bowling is in the beer and pizza, not the balls and shoes." Read that again, because he wrote it in 1995, and it's still the most accurate description of this business anyone has produced. A league bowler wasn't a customer. A league bowler was a subscription. 30-plus weeks, paid up front, on a Tuesday night in February when nobody else would be in the building. Leagues filled the dead hours, guaranteed the cash flow, and sat at a table eating and drinking for 3 hours while they did it. Industry sources say leagues once generated around 70% of a center's business. Today, they're closer to 40 and still falling. So when the leagues went, the alleys didn't just lose bowlers. They lost the only predictable revenue they had in the only hours they couldn't otherwise sell. And this is where the industry made its choice. If your Tuesday nights are empty and the money was never really in the bowling anyway, what do you sell instead? Look at the numbers from the largest operator in the country and you'll have your answer. The company is called Lucky Strike Entertainment. Until December of 2024, it was called Bolero. In its fiscal 2025, ending in June of last year, it reported total revenue of $1.2 billion. Here's how it's split. Bowling, $549.9 million, 45.8%. Food and beverage, $424.2 million, 35.3%. Amusement and other, arcade games, attractions, everything that isn't a lane or a plate, $227.2 million, 18.9%. Bowling is a minority of revenue at the biggest bowling company in America, and the direction matters more than the split. Bowling revenue fell about 1.5% that year. Food and beverage rose almost 6%. Amusement rose over 16%. The lanes are no longer the product. They're the reason you walk in the door. Everything that actually makes money happens once you're inside. Which raises the obvious question. If you wanted to buy one of these, what does it actually cost? More than you'd think. The Bowling Proprietors Trade Association puts it at roughly $80,000 per lane and about $4.5 million for a full center. And that's a trade group's number, so treat it as a friendly one. A single regulation lane needs around 88 feet of length. The approach, the 60-foot lane itself, the pin deck, the pit, and a service aisle behind the machine so a technician can physically get to it. And that machine is its own story. The Pinsetters in most American alleys are free-fall machines descended from designs that are now decades old. Roughly $15,000 to $25,000 per lane, mechanically complex, and they need a specialist to keep running, so the industry is quietly replacing them. String pin setters, which reset the pins on cords instead of dropping them mechanically, cost around $8,000 to $12,000 per lane, use less power, and need dramatically less maintenance. And in a decision that mattered enormously to owners, the sport's governing body approved them for sanctioned league play, which tells you exactly where the priorities are now. The machine that made bowling a mass sport in 1946 is being retired, not because the sport demanded it, but because the operators needed the maintenance bill to come down. And a lot of them didn't get the chance to make that choice at all, because while all this was happening, the buildings themselves were vanishing. Remember the peak, roughly 12,000 bowling centers in the mid-1960s. By 1986, the census counted 6,148 employer establishments. By 2023, that number was 3,154. Cut in half, then cut in half again. Roughly 3/4 of America's bowling alleys are gone. So who's left? And here's where the story stops being about bowling entirely. In 1997, a man named Thomas Shannon bought a single bowling alley in Manhattan called Bowmore Lanes. one location. What he built from it is one of the most aggressive roll-ups in American entertainment. AMF, the company that invented the automatic pinsetter, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 2001 and filed again in 2012. Shannon's company acquired it in 2013. The following year, Brunswick, the other giant of the industry, exited bowling centers entirely, selling 85 of them for $270 million to Shannon. In 2019, the company bought the Professional Bowlers Association itself, the actual sport. In December of 2021, it went public through a SPAC. And in December of 2024, it stopped calling itself a bowling company at all and became Lucky Strike Entertainment. Around 370 locations, $1.2 billion in revenue. The Pinsetter Company, the Lane Company, and the Professional Tour, all absorbed into one operator. But the filings tell a more complicated story than the headline. In that same fiscal 2025, the company posted a net loss of $10 million. Same-store revenue, the measure of how existing locations are actually performing, stripped of acquisitions, fell 3.7%. Total debt sat around $1.31 billion, and total stockholders' equity was negative $298.7 million. Growth on the top line, shrinkage underneath it. So how does a company in that position keep funding acquisitions? It sells the one thing it has that's genuinely, permanently valuable. In October of 2023, the company sold 38 of its bowling centers to a real estate investment trust called Vissi Properties for $432.9 million and immediately leased them back. 25-year term, about $31.6 million a year in rent, a cap rate of 7.3%. They didn't sell the bowling business. They sold the ground underneath it and rented it back so they could keep operating on top. And that is the actual answer to the question this video opened with. A bowling alley is not primarily a bowling business, and it hasn't been for decades. It's a food and beverage operation with an unusually large piece of real estate attached. 20 to 40,000 square feet of flat, single-story, commercially zoned land, almost always in a suburb, usually bought when that land was cheap. For thousands of these buildings, the land eventually became worth more than anything that could be done inside it. And when that happens, the alley doesn't get sold to a better bowling operator. It gets sold to somebody who wants the parcel, which brings us to the last detail. And if you've watched this channel before, you already know where this is going. Across the country, closed bowling alleys have become churches, apartments, car dealerships. But the most common second life for a dead alley is one specific business, one that wants exactly what a bowling alley has. A huge flat footprint, a suburban location, cheap construction, and almost no need for foot traffic. Self-storage. North Aurora, Illinois. Rantoul, Illinois. Orlando, Clinton Township, Michigan. In Woodbridge, New Jersey, a former bowling alley became a 5-story, 107,000 square foot self-storage facility. The building where a town's Tuesday night league bowled for 30 years is now 107,000 square feet of rooms full of things nobody opens. That's the ending of this business. Not a bankruptcy, a conversion. So should you own one? Here's the honest version. You can absolutely make money in bowling. The successful operators today run restaurants and event venues that happen to have lanes in them, where the birthday parties and the corporate outings and the bar tab do the work, and the bowling is the excuse. That's a real business, and some people run it very well. But understand what you'd actually be buying. You are not buying a sport. The sport left. 9.8 million league bowlers walked out of these buildings over 4 decades and never came back. And no amount of neon or glow bowling brought them in again. What you'd be buying is a large piece of suburban land with a very expensive machine at the end of every lane and a bar in the front. And the moment that land becomes worth more empty than full, the math stops being about bowling at all. Don Carter signed the first $1 million endorsement in the history of sports in 1964. 12 million people watch bowling on network television on a Saturday afternoon. And the buildings that made all of that possible are now, one by one, being filled with storage units. If this changed the way you look at the one on the edge of your town, subscribe. We take apart one everyday business every week, and the numbers are never what you'd guess.